Remember, we're on the home stretch here. We have two appropriations to the Premier to consider that were deferred from last week. They all relate to the OFREG. The first appropriation for us to consider, I believe they're all related to fuel storage and distribution, regulation of fuel markets. URC 10, monitoring and controlling the storage, handling, quality, and mensuration of fuel products. $812,000 in 2020 and 2021. Are there any questions? Member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. The question that I had asked, and the gentleman who wasn't here, last Finance Committee, that is November 2017, I think it was, we were told that they were conducting a study to determine what would be the correct color codes to standardize the hose nozzles at the retail fuel pump. My question is, has that study been completed? What was the cost of it? Has it been implemented? What is the color coding going to be?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Duke Monroe, Chief Fuels Inspector and Director of Fuels Market. Through you, Mr. Chair, in regards to the assessment that was done, I wish to clarify that it was a discussion paper that we outlined that we were conducting at that time in terms of engaging the industry and the public in terms of the colors, the two colors that we should standardize across all dispensers, and it came about as a result of issues we were having with misfueling. I can report that we have gotten feedback from the industry in terms of the two colors that were proposed. We had proposed to use blue and black across all of the brands that are operating in the retail market, and we've gotten various feedback primarily from the three brands indicating that they're amenable to it, and once we have finalized on those colors, they will then need a transition time to move to those colors. In terms of the cost, it was all done as part of OFREG's routine work in terms of our engaging in the market, so it was not done by a third party.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, is OFREG in the regulatory business, or is OFREG in the negotiating business?
Through you, Mr. Chair, OFREG's requirement under the URC law is a very engaging one in terms of how we interact with the industry we regulate. Under the relevant sections, Section 9 and Section 7, I believe, we have an obligation to consult on any decision that we take in all of the sectors that we regulate. So the process is that we would have come up with what we would have assessed and determined to be the best way forward. We then have an obligation to engage the industry for them to be allowed to share their views on to allow us to arrive at a final position for implementation.
Your obligation, according to the law, as you said, is to consult on decisions that you made. When is the decision going to be made that all fuel nozzles will be blue and black, and what will be blue and what will be black?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, that exercise was a discussion paper. So what we're, based on the feedback we've gotten, we will then make a determination that the two colors that we have chosen, because we've gotten a number of feedback that we have now taken into consideration, and we're not at liberty to disclose those colors because that will then be our determination that goes out to the public in terms of the two colors that we have, that we are going to go with for the industry. And as I said, we need to respect that the industry, they have brand element, brand concerns and things like that. So taking all of that into account, that will then determine that the final position, the final colors are not those two that we proposed in that paper, but the final two colors, which, as I mentioned, we are not at liberty to discuss or disclose at this moment. Then we're going to set at that time the implementation date for those colors.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we've had 2 years of discussion. When is the decision going to be made? I know. Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, in 6 months, we will make the decision.
You're telling me off-reg determines that there's a safety risk, there's a security risk, there are any number of risks because different fuel companies in this country are using different color handles, and it's going to take off-reg 2 years and 6 months to come to a decision of what's supposed to happen in the interim period. This is a decision that you should be able to take in a week.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to clarify one point. That consultation started earlier this year, and I think we'd made that disclosure at our earlier meeting this year. So, but I know that's beside the point. We have assessed the risk, and it's a good point we take on board that there's a risk of misfueling in the market, but it's not a safety risk. It's a means of advocating for our consumers. So whenever they go to a service station, they know one color represents gasoline and another color represents diesel. So it's not a safety risk of anything exploding or going on fire, but it's in terms of looking out and advocating for consumers. So the time frame is not a problem for us per se. And because of the consultative process, the 6 month is a safe place for us to rest. But if there are opportunities to implement it earlier, we will.
Mr. Chairman, is the fuel inspector, regulator, whatever you tell is, telling me that if somebody goes to a gas station and says, I want diesel, and somebody puts gasoline in it, and they're going to use that diesel to light a fire when they get back home, there's not a safety risk in that? Come on, man.
Through you, Mr. Chair, a good point of clarification. What the focus we are on in terms of fueling at the gas station is fuel being pumped into motor vehicles and not fuel being dispensed into containers for these alternative uses.
So you have no concern about putting the wrong fuel in the wrong container?
Mr. Speaker, no, that's not the issue. If when fuel is being dispensed into containers, that would be a lot more diligent, and the process to correct the situation if someone actually obtained gasoline instead of diesel, it's less of an issue for that person that would have been purchasing that product.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I can see we're not getting away with that. Second question. Do you in any way monitor fuel put in storage tanks at gas stations and fuel sold from that to determine whether there's any leakage in the tanks at any time? And if so, how do you do it?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the member, the question, to better understand it, are we monitoring the tanks that store fuel at the gas station as to whether there is leakage and how we do it. All the gas stations that have underground tanks, the industry standards are for those tanks to be double wall tank with permanently installed leak detection system. So as part of our annual inspection, we do print off of the leak detection system. We run the reports to ensure that there are no leaks detected. But the system is so designed that it is an active system. So once it springs a leak, the space between the two tanks is monitored. Once it springs a leak, that triggers an alarm to the retailers, the operators, and they then need to report that to us promptly.
So you're confident that there's no leakage in any of these gas station tanks, including some of those that have been in the ground for a number of years, but which I believe were put in the ground when you didn't have that leak detection system?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry for that minor correction, Mr. Chair. Through you to the member. Yes, we are confident to the best of the ability of the system that we are being provided with information that tells us of the integrity of those underground storage equipment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, when I get into politics, I can try to get your job.
Member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when a couple of years ago, we amended, I think it's the fuel handling storage law, and we amended it to allow government to demand invoices from the suppliers for the purposes of monitoring prices. Do we do that now?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we monitor. We receive those invoices and we monitor the prices.
Okay, and what do they? How do they compare with world oil price? And are the prices at the pumps reasonable compared with world oil price?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The prices at the pumps have continued to move. The prices at the pump locally have continued to move in sympathy with oil prices, taking into account the delay it takes to get fuel here, which is about 4 weeks.
It takes 4 weeks. Where do we get that fuel from?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we get fuel mainly from the U.S., from the Gulf Coast, and we also obtain from other major terminals around the region, Bahamas in particular.
And why does it take 4 weeks?
Through you, Mr. Chair, for logistics reasons, the suppliers, their supply chain is of such that they service a number of jurisdictions around the region, so it's not a direct uplift and delivery to the Cayman Islands only.
And so you're saying that it is reasonable?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Use the same words you just used. Use the same words you just used, because I slipped. One of them slipped me.
No. Through you, Mr. Chair. What I mentioned earlier is that the prices at the pump moves in sympathy with global prices, and
as I recall, using the word sympathy means it goes up. It sympathy in world and in fuel prices means if the world oil price goes up, this one goes up, which we quite understand. But that doesn't mean that it is reasonably priced above the world oil price. Two different things. I ask you a different question. Is it reasonable compared with world oil prices? And that is taking everything into consideration. Profits. You notice I didn't ask you how much the difference was. Actually, if it's reasonable price, that is taken into account transportation, insurance, and all of the other indices that go with it. Is it reasonable a price?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the question is an interesting question to answer.
You think I don't know that?
But what I will say to the House is we seek not to be myopic or just have blinders on in terms of looking at the prices in Cayman alone. We scan across the region to see where prices are in other similar jurisdictions to also gauge how reasonable the prices are. We do believe, however, at OFREC that as with anything, the prices locally can be optimized, and it is our aim.
I like your choice of words. That's pretty good. Sound like a lawyer. Your first calling was being a lawyer. Mr. Chairman, I am sure the gentleman recognizes, like I do, that these commodities touch the souls of everybody. Thus the reason why we put regulators. We put them within the regulatory bodies, within that framework of regulation. And in many jurisdictions, like for instance electricity here and water, that profit line is controlled, tightly controlled, in order that it does not have a runaway and destroy, one, the commodity, the economy, and by extension, put hardships on people. And there is a reasonable amount that is allowed above all of the costs, related costs to get that delivered, that commodity delivered to the end user. Are you all, because it was suggested, inferred, that at some stage we were going, as a result of having these invoices and the comparisons that we just went through, that we would be at some stage looking at imposing such limits on the suppliers and retailers, for that matter, that would be within a reasonable profit margin, with a reasonable profit margin. Is that still the case, that we are moving in that direction?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as the member rightly points out, it is still our obligation as OFREC to ensure that we establish a regime which looks at all of the costs and ensuring the viability of the operators in the sector while delivering a fair price at the pump. That is still our plan, and we are on track to achieving that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to hear that, but I mean, the obvious question is when do we hope to achieve that objective? Because I know there are different methods of doing it. For instance, we developed the RCAM in electricity. I was the minister at that time. It was I who negotiated electricity rates. And I think water authority is now going through those same negotiations, because fuel, electricity, water, and communications are commodities that we can't afford to have run away. How long is it going to take to reach some kind of, are we in negotiations now? Should be the first question.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we have set about a very objective process to carry out this exercise in the form of the fuel market assessment. As I mentioned, it is a regulatory tool. It is an objective tool that allows us to be able to defend our position in terms of whatever mechanism we seek to put in place. That assessment is currently on the way. It's in its third month, and we expect it to run for 6 months, and that is because of the consultation aspect of that, as we are obligated to do under the law. So we're anticipating that assessment will be completed in March to April of 2020, and that will inform the measures we will recommend, the regulatory measures we will recommend to Cabinet for full implementation.
What is the process? You're establishing data? Because if that's the case, there's no need to do that. You can demand that from them.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that the member is correct. No, it's not establishing data, but we are utilizing economic and regulatory tools to assess the market, the competitiveness of the market, which areas of the market as regulator we need to focus on so that we don't go wasting our efforts on segments of the market that may not require any form of regulatory intervention. So this exercise is taking the information we have to inform how we proceed with intervening.
I thank you, sir, but you have been here long enough to know that my memory is very long. So March, April next year, I'll come and look for you. Now, everybody deserves a second chance. Mr. Chairman, the other area I want to discuss with the gentleman, Mr. Monroe, is that we had our difficulties recently with storage, and I believe it was determined that not so much negligence, but workmanship, more like negligence. Negligence and workmanship, I think, was determined to be the cause of that one. That is not to say that negligence in other areas will not result in a much greater disaster. Do we continue to monitor these things on a regular basis, and how regular do we monitor them? And secondly, who recalibrates the vents?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we continue to actively monitor these sites, and we have ramped up the system to ensure compliance by the industry. As you correctly point out, the dangerous substance law is intended to achieve that so that we can ensure the industry is meeting and living up to their obligations based on established industry standards. So we inspect and monitor these on an annual basis. albeit our stretched resources. And we also have, with the amended laws that you made reference to earlier, we now have a system. It's now a legal requirement for the calibration, whereas that was done previously based on the industry's best practices and standard. It's now required by law to have those calibrations, all forms of calibrations done on an annual basis.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want those who might be hearing this discussion to think that anything is afoot or anything is dangerous in this country or anything of that matter. I God forbid we get people coming away from this conversation thinking that, because there are certain standards that must be met when it comes to dangerous storage of dangerous goods like this, and it's just a matter of me asking him if we're monitoring them on a regular basis. Like at a gas station, you're not gonna get flames going into those tanks. They're flame arresters and the likes. Well, I can't go through all that right now, but those are the things I'm talking about, because they gather dust and they do not operate as effective as they should. And on occasion you have to recalibrate them, you have to redo them and whatnot. That's all I'm asking them, if they're doing that on a regular basis. Which I don't want people to go away thinking that everything is just going to go into flames.
Member for Bodden Towns West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the witness, can he briefly explain to this Honorable House the governance model that is in place with regards to regulating the fuel companies on island?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The model is twofold in terms of regulating the fuel companies. As you're aware, OFREG regulates both the economic operation of the industry sector by way of the fuels market regulation law, and we also regulate the fuels industry from a safety and compliance side under the dangerous substances law. The dangerous substances law and the safety and compliance regulation essentially involves us establishing the parameters based on industry standard as to what we are going to inspect on an annual basis, and this involves the types of equipment in use, the policies and procedures the industry have in place to ensure that they are meeting those obligations. We are also responsible as a compliance regulator to approve the types of equipment also imported and installed at the at premises, as well as at the fuel terminals in terms for both liquid fuels and propane fuels. In terms of the economic regulatory model we have in place, as we indicated, as I hinted earlier, that model is still in development because an important precursor to economic regulation is to have that market assessment done, which defines the extent and the level of intervention we are going to take in terms of the economic operation of the fuel sector.
Thank you very much. In terms of your economic oversight, do the fuel companies provide, or either at a retail level or wholesale level, do they provide audited financial statements?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the regulation, as the law and regulation we currently have in place now, is more geared towards the importers. However, the URC law does have provision for us to request information for us to carry out our regulatory role. So at this stage, we are focusing on the importers, and that sets out all of the requirement for the information that they need to provide to us in terms of invoices, how their costs are manifested and reflected in their price that they come up for the product that they sell to retailers. We have not been, for want of a better word, interrogating or requesting that information from the retailers on an ongoing basis. However, that information is key to the current exercise of fuels market assessment. So right now, those requests are going out to the importers, the wholesalers, LPG, and also the retailers to develop this this economic regulatory model for the sector.
So just to be clear, we are not requesting their audit. We're not seeing, we don't have visibility now of their audited financial statements.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my apologies to the member. I missed that part of the question. We are not requesting. We have not requested since the regime started. We have not requested their audited financial statements. The importers.
Do you guys track the total amount of quantities that arrive on island each year within those different sectors?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we track all the quantities imported.
And is there a set policy in terms of how much fuel we normally have on island at any given point? Is there a requirement to keep a certain amount in reserve or anything?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's an excellent question. We do not have that in terms of the big picture, but OFREG as an entity, because of our oversight in the electricity sector, there's a minimum requirement for the product which constitutes almost 70% of Cayman Islands import and consumption. And with that comes some responsibility for reserve capacity, as you mentioned, at the major terminals, also as well as at the largest consumer site. The other products, we have not set a minimum quantity or reserve quantity just yet, but it is going to be part of the model that is going to be in place. I should dare say, so as not to have persons believing that at any point in time there could be fuel supply and security issues. The industry, it's in their best interest to ensure that they have adequate supplies, so they do their best, and we also are right there with them in terms of nominating products to be imported so that we are aware as to what quantities are available, and we also have information on a frequent basis. I believe up to as much, maybe the longest is for a month. It's done on a monthly basis. We have information on current stock. My apologies. We receive that stock information on a weekly basis, so we know when projected stock out dates are and when supplies are supposed to be in to replenish that stock.
Are we looking in terms of developing a policy, considering that we live in a hurricane belt and things can happen, in terms of how much fuel reserve or fuel stock or fuel supply we should have on island at any minimum time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the answer to that is yes. And further to that, once we enter the hurricane season, we have a system of more frequent reporting, so that if anything changes, we are up to date on that. But it will be formalized by way of policy as part of the regulation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That brings me then to the meat of the issue I want to get into. And this is where the favor comes in, because I know I'm not going to get the answer today. But if the fuel stock or the fuel reserve maintains a certain level throughout the stations, and I've been looking at the quantity of fuel and everything that has been imported into the country. I got this off the Port Authority website, went back to 2010. And I see all the quantities for each year. It has basically been in the same ballpark area. So despite population growth and everything else, there appears to be a little small correction year on year. And I also have with me the aggregate or the full value of all of those things that are imported. Now, unfortunately, the ESO report, which is the Foreign Trade Statistics Report of 2018, did not give me a breakdown of what is gas, what is diesel in terms of value, but they value the entire sector of all of those imports coming in. So, in a nutshell, just to give you an idea, and one of the things that I did was I look at the total value of what they were bringing in, and I compared it to the total fuel factor cost that CUC passes on to the customer. So I can now, in essence, take out or have an idea what the value of the CUC portion is. Now, I know the CUC portion is fixed. I think there's a set rate, and there's a little bit above what the global price is. So CUC, if anything, is paying close to cost. And the government over the years have consistently reduced the duty on that to this basically almost down to nothing. So that has been a saving that's passed on to the consumer. So just to kind of give you an idea, in 2014, the total value of stuff that we imported on the minerals, fuels, lubricants, and related materials was $178,481. In 2014, of that $178,481, there's $158,297,000 that was passed on from CUC to the consumers. So $178 million in change came in. CUC was $158 million. In 2015, the total value that came in was $107 million thereabouts. Total pass on to consumers on CUCs, and this is CUC's financial statements, was $112 million. $107 million came in, and I do recognize that there's fluctuation with the value of inventory stocks and everything. In 2016, the total value that came in was $93 million, and CUC passed on roughly $82 million to consumers. In 2017, $112 million came in, and CUC passed on $104 million. And in 2018, a total of $136 million came in, and CUC passed on $104 million. 86 million of 2017, 104 million. So the point I'm trying to get into all of this, recognizing stock and recognizing change in inventory, whether you use LIFO, FIFO, whatever you use to value stocks. If the total value of what is coming in, at least 75% to roughly 88, 90%, depends on what year you looked on, is passed on directly to consumers on the CUC side. Question, how much profit are they making if the cost is pretty much covered by CUC's volume, and recognizing that this includes everybody? Then what is left is what the consumers are paying an arm and a leg for, when most of the cost is already covered at the plug, and now we're getting murdered at the pump. So the question in all of this that I would like, Mr. Monroe, is for you to provide to this honorable House and the members an analysis in terms of the value of the fuel that comes into this country, and I'm sure government can get the breakdown of this because ESO has aggregated it, so I can't break it down. What CUC is taking, then it gives an idea of the markup or the value that the fuel companies are making. I'm not interested in seeing the invoices because Bahamas have margin set, and those invoices that goes into Bahamas does not reflect anywhere to the margin. Because Bahamas regulate the margin you can call, you can charge from when the fuel arrives to when it reaches the pump. I think it's the equivalent of 27 cents for diesel and 33 cents CI for gasoline. And those margins have been set. So what we're trying to understand is exactly how painful this process is. And you can just imagine how I feel when I see that the cost is literally being the value is almost being recouped on the CUC side of things. And then it means that what the consumer is paying is gravy. So I would really like for that analysis to be done so we can have a true idea exactly of what it is that we're paying inside this country. Because what we have right now, and as I look at it in terms of the ESO, if you look at even the company statistics, what we're paying for fuel compared to elsewhere, there's no reason then for us to be paying what we're paying now. And that is the exercise I would like for your organization to undertake and provide to us exactly so we can see exactly how much these people are making. Now, we have already asked ESO when they were here earlier to provide us a breakdown compared to other regions of our basket of goods to see exactly what it is that we are paying. And that, Mr. Chairman, is my contribution on this matter. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member very much for that very pertinent overview of the situation. I can confirm that it's an exercise we currently do undertake. So, yes, sorry about that. So as I was saying, it's an exercise that we're obligated to do by law. However, there are some restrictions in terms of disclosing that information apart from to cabinet. So that's I just wanted to clarify that point in terms of the analysis that you refer to. Thank you.
Member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think the gentleman said that he's hoping to complete this negotiation consultation on whatever your economic tool is going to be by April or March or April next year. How long is it going to take off reg after you complete that exercise to make a decision as to which economic formula you're going to use?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the process is almost immediate that we then take that information to make recommendations to cabinet because OFREG is not at liberty to implement those measures. We then have to package solid recommendations to cabinet for implementation.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we have had another fuel supplier enter the market a year and better before. Is the system under which they obtain their fuel different from the other fuel companies?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, the logistics of their supply is different, but the fuel ultimately comes from the same source, particularly if it comes from the US, but the logistics of getting it to the Cayman Islands is different.
So they're getting their fuel ultimately from the same source that the two fuel companies are getting it, yet they can offer the product to market substantially cheaper than the fuel companies who've been here for years getting their return on investment.
Through you, Mr. Chair, two things we need to distinguish is that the product is different even though it comes from the same source. One is a ethanol blend and one is the conventional type of fuel. And very importantly, their business model of operating is different. Whereas the smaller, as you mentioned, they're coming straight to market, straight to their retail facility. The bulk importers store, then they transfer to retailers. So there's two value added levels to that as compared to one in the case of the smaller entity.
So they are not affected by rise and fall of fuel prices as the established companies because they have storage that they've already bought when the market price changed, right? Their supplies, their company, their supply would be smaller, so they would not have as much. If they bought it at $5, they would not have as much stored as $5 a price as the fuel companies would have at the $5 that they bought it for.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I understand the member correctly, their prices will be more in the market, we would say, in that their prices are closer to what the current prices are as of today or next week than the established fuel suppliers who would have purchased in bulk quantities and have that price at that product, at a cost for a longer period of time.
What is the international price for fuels at the present time?
Currently,
Per
fuel-
barrel? Whatever.
Through you, Mr. Chair, currently global prices for oil, which is where we start, is in the range of $60 a barrel, and refined prices currently is in the range of $1.50 to about $1.75 per gallon refined clean product prices.
Okay. So a couple of years ago, when per barrel fuel was over $200, we could buy gasoline for $5 a gallon. I don't think it ever went above $5.50. My memory serves me right. Today, it is at $60, but gasoline is still $4.50. Can you explain that difference?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a very interesting observation in terms of where prices have gone and the sort of changes in the market and inflation and changes in business model, changes in economic models of these suppliers. But that is a focal point of this assessment we are conducting. So we thank you very much for that point and observation.
Look, I don't want an observation. I want to know why we were only paying $5 a gallon when the price was more than 3 times per barrel. Why hasn't the retail price gone down proportionately? Because the overheads have not changed that much. And in fact, should be less because they've gotten return on their investments for years. They haven't made any improvements in their investments or increased their investments.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there has been some changes in the market, and OFREG is by no means seeking to justify the observation you made in terms of the prices. But their companies have changed hands, their economics have changed in that process in terms of acquiring assets. So those are some of the factors that play into this stretch in terms of where prices were relative to global oil prices a few years back to where it is now. But as I emphasize, it is a focal point. It is a keen observation that we are seeking to objectively arrive at in terms of moving the market forward.
You mean increase prices by moving it forward?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, sir.
Okay. But your role hasn't changed. Your role is to protect the consumer, irregardless of who the owner of these fuel companies are. So why does change in ownership be allowed to reflect an increase in price?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I said that much to clarify that once a company is acquired, they're allowed the assets and the value of the assets on the book is allowed based on accounting and all of these considerations to change. And with these process comes changes in terms of their model. So if they're going to recover on the value of what they've acquired, these things factor into their commodity, their end prices. But we are not, as I emphasize, we are not accepting that is what it needs to be, and we are objectively through this process are going to be drilling down to these factors in terms of advocating for consumers and ensuring that the prices, as I said, are optimal.
But shouldn't the regulator be looking at the cost of the product, including their handling fee and everything else, cost of the product versus the profit that they're making on that product on behalf of the consumer? Certainly they shouldn't be allowed, if they invest in something that they can own for 30 years, they shouldn't be able to write it off in the first year.
Through you, Mr.
And
Chair.
then what is the formula? Can you tell us what are the economic formulas that you are negotiating with these fuel companies? What does it entail? What are you looking to achieve and get them to agree to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we are to the member, what we are seeking to achieve is to ensure that based on their current economic arrangement, based on the business models that they have in place, that we can ensure that they are making what is considered a fair return on their investment, while balancing that with the price to consumers. In terms of the changes that we've seen over the years, as I acknowledge, we do not have all of the factors that would explain that change, but there are factors such as inflation and these other changes that would have caused the difference between the price per barrel 10 years ago to what the cost of the pump was then, as compared to 2019, when the price per barrel is at $60 and the price of the pump is just under $5.
But certainly you're not suggesting that their operational costs can account for something that you were paying $200 a barrel was costing us $5 a gallon. Something you're paying $60 a barrel now costing us $4.50 per barrel. Only 50% difference in the price at the retail. Aren't you taking?
Mr. Chairman, well,
through you, Mr. Chair, based on my recollection of the member's question, we can confirm that we're not justifying that their operational costs would have allowed them to move to the levels that they're currently at, but we are restating that it's part of our current assessment to set a model in place for the regulation of the market.
What are the components of the model that you're trying to get them to agree to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the regulatory model will involve ensuring that once we've established their levels of investment, we can then determine what is a fair return on that investment. We can then determine what are the minimum standards of delivery of product. We are not in any way at this point going to recommend limits on any of those cost elements at this point in time, because that's a policy decision. But in the end, through the process, we are going to ensure that they have what is a fair return for themselves, and coming out of that, the price that is manifested at the pump is going to be an equitable price.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. Are you working for the fuel companies, or are you working for the regulator to protect the people of the country?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I uphold the most ethical and professional standards in the delivery of my duties and my role, and I execute it as objectively as possible for my employers.
But you see, sir, I'm not worried about your objectivity. I want you to do what we were told Ofreg was going to do for the people of this country. Control the quality and control the prices. I don't want no objectivity. I want the price lowered, and I want better fuel.
Member for East End.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I heard the discourse, and Mr. Chairman, when you come to rates, they are extremely difficult things to do, to manage, especially when there are bans. But right off the top of my head, considering RCAM and the likes, what we have two situations where we have a base. First base we have is world oil price, albeit 2 months delayed. It will always be 2 months delayed before you get that price, because that's what it takes to get all those numbers together to have an average price. Basically, that's all it is. Then we have a company that is providing a product who has assets, investments that you need to ensure that they remain viable. But it's from that base of that company, that we need to determine the cost of fuel. That base and the base of world oil price. That is how it's done with the utilities with CUC here. That is exactly how it's done. They get fuel at world oil price, and then they pay a transportation and profits and the likes, depreciation and the likes out of that. Now, as a regulator, we have not the duty, but we have the ability to demand that their books, that their cost centers be shown to us to establish a reasonable profit margin based on taking world oil price as a standard. And we can remove that for a minute, park that while we negotiate over here on that price that will then drive the price up over the world oil price. Is that the direction we're going in? Because that is important. It's extremely important. But what we are doing is sympathizing with that world oil price. And that sympathy needs to remain once we have established this other one. And that sympathy must remain, and they go in tandem with each other. They sympathize with each other. And they go, but they are fixed. Both are fixed. The world oil price is fixed. It may be different tomorrow than it was yesterday, but it's fixed for us based on the world market. And then this one is fixed based on assets and the amount of returns. That's why we could use RCAM. So somewhere in there we need to be, because I just heard you say that right now we're looking at $1.50 to $1.75 per gallon fuel. And they don't, very little differentiation between the different mediums of fuel. There's very little difference. Yet, when we go out now, it's $4.69 at the pump. And that's what you were just saying about the $1.50, $1.75 is US. Because you can only express that in US dollars, because that's how the world oil price is that is how it's sold in US currency. Yet, 469 is what, Chris? 469 CI is $1 US, $5, big $5 and cents. So we're talking at least $3 differential. And if we were fixing at if the world oil price was at 175, then we would know the assets of the company and give them a reasonable margin so that they could be viable. You know, that they wouldn't fail. And I don't understand why we're not approaching it from that perspective. Because I know that's how it's done. Are we considering something of that nature? I'm not saying the exact thing now.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the answer is yes. That approach is broadly what we are seeking to accomplish as part of our regulatory framework. However, it is important that we clarify that when we get to the place of dictating what those, what the end price is, price control, and that's a policy decision that we are not empowered, we don't have the authority. But the broad concept, as you explain it, is the approach that we are seeking to, utilizing the a format or a variation of the ARCA model to sort of ensure that.
Mr. Chairman, I hear him. I understand. That is why I did not take part in the discussions with CUC, because you can't appeal from Caesar to Caesar.
Thank you.
And I had the veto power. And it was I who made the recommendations to Cabinet that this is the way we were going to go. But Cabinet had nothing to do with it until it arrived there, and Cabinet was insulated from it. And I expect that you would insulate Cabinet from those negotiations and then explain it to them in such broad, common terms that they understand, because it's a difficult thing to negotiate and appreciate and understand. Not that they're dumb, it's just that they don't know, but not many people know this business. And I expect that would happen, that the policy decision would be made at Cabinet level. And you can appreciate that we have been at this thing a long time. And our objective here, and you know this, is to look relief for people. And when the relief is not forthcoming, our people are going to complain to all 19 of us. In other words, what I'm saying is we need to be steadfast in our resolve and be like Nike. Let's just do it. Thank you.
Member for Bodentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, just looking at the fuel market regulation law for 2017, I noticed on the schedule on page 8 of the law, it says sectoral providers with significant market power. 1, Rubis Cayman Islands Limited in the automotive fuel market, Sol Petroleum Cayman Limited in the automotive fuel market, Solar Energy Resources Inc. in the supplies and trading markets for petroleum products, and 4, Home Gas Limited in the liquid petroleum gas market. Recognizing that the law or the schedule already recognizes that these entities have significant or dominant market power, and ultimately one of the purposes of regulations is to recognize that not every single entity, or not every single industry you can have full competition in. And as a result, some needs to be regulated. The question in all of this is, what regulations have we put in place thus far? Bear in mind now, next year will be 3 years now, I think, since we have started on this path. What regulations have been put in place to manage these dominant providers within the marketplace?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, sorry. It's a very pointed question in that as part of, to inform our regulatory regime, there are certain prerequisites, and one of the most important prerequisites is in addition to their designation as SMP, we need to have a clear assessment of the competition and the way the markets are operating to inform the rules. Because essentially what you're asking is what rules have been put in place. We were unable to progress the market assessment to allow us to make very informed rules. We have looked at very minor basic rules in terms of tweaking the price reporting to us and the kinds of information that should go into the information we receive every time a vessel is received in port. And in terms of some issues that arise during their day-to-day operations, to ensure that we keep the market in check. But it was going to be remiss and uninformed for OFREG to go ahead and put robust rules in place in the context of a license framework without that assessment. So the assessment, I say that to say the assessment was the foundation, it was the starting point, and we've encountered some delays in advancing that assessment. But we continue to monitor the market to ensure that nothing was flagrantly out of place that we needed to rein in, which we are also empowered to do by law. But on the completion of this market assessment, then OFREG, as an established regulator, a regulator of excellence, a regulator that makes informed decision, then we are able to set those rules to guide the economic operation of those entities in the market.
Just so I'm clear, how long does these assessment would normally take to do?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it varies, but the current one we have, it's slated for 6 months. We intended to commence this immediately upon the formation of OFREG in 2017, but as I mentioned, we encountered some delays.
Mr. Chairman, like I said, early next year will make 3 years since we started this, looking at the law and everything else. And the reason why I asked that question, and this is one of the contentions, and I raised it this morning with regards to the level of technocrats that, in terms of providing information, and I want to read section 5.2 G and H of the Fuel Market Regulation Law 2017, and it says, in performing its function and exercising its powers under this or any other law, the office shall conduct market analysis to assess the effectiveness of competitions in the market, and H, shall provide reports to the Cabinet on the effectiveness of competition in the fuel market. So the question I want to ask in all of this, seeing that it is required by law, as OFREG in particular, your sector, provide any reports to Cabinet with regards to competition in the fuel market?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the answer is no. We have not provided any of those assessments to the Cabinet or Minister.
Okay, I'm not a member of Cabinet, but I'm a member of this legislature that empowers Cabinet. So the next question is this: when then can we expect such a report to be provided to Cabinet?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that such a report will be forthcoming in March or April of 2020.
And within that report, is it fair to say that we can expect some rules? Because right now, based on the schedule in this law, we don't have a monopoly, as in the case of CUC, we have a duopoly in the case of Sol and Rubis. And they should be treated just as though my colleague from East End was speaking about. They use the RCAM model to protect the returns for the investors. In the telecom side, they use the LYRIC model, and I think the FL LYRIC or whatever, something like that model. The question then is this: can we expect that that report will also include some model to ensure that those players within the within the fuel industry is also getting a reasonable rate of return and not, in essence, taking it on the consumer? Because in essence, they're running around unregulated at this point. So will the report contain a model to ensure what it is as a reasonable rate of return for them, so at least we can start seeing some reduction in prices?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, the report will include models. The requirement is to provide a number of models to us that we will evaluate to determine which is best suited. So we're having a number of options on the table coming out of the process.
Mr. Chairman, as a member of, you're a member of cabinet, and to your other colleagues in cabinet, we will look forward to any update that you guys can provide in March of next year. Thank you.
All in favor of URC 10, monitoring and controlling the storage, handling, quality, and mensuration of fuel products, $812,000 in 2020, $812,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. URC 11, monitoring and regulation of the fuel market. Okay, I'm happy to do so. All in favor of URC 11, monitoring and regulation of the fuel market, $588,000 in 2020 and $588,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Members, this concludes the deliberations of Finance Committee for in terms of the examination of the budget for the 2-year period for 2020 and 2021. And now that we have reached the end of our detailed considerations of the items in the schedule to the bill, there are a few more procedural matters that I need to put to the committee. Firstly, pursuant to Standing Order 64-4, I put the following question to committee: that the schedule, as amended by Finance Committee, stand part of the bill. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. The schedule, as amended, therefore, stands part of the bill. Secondly, pursuant to Standing Order 64-5, we need to consider the clauses to the bill. There are only 3 clauses to the bill. Clause 1 to the bill reads as follows: this law may be cited as the appropriation, in brackets, financial years 20 and 21, law, close brackets, law 2019. All those in favor of Clause 1 standing part of the bill, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Clause 2 reads as follows: the Cabinet may incur executive expenses, acquire executive assets, make equity investments or loans, and undertake borrowing for the financial years 20 and 21 in the amounts and for the respective purposes set forth in the schedule. All those in favor of Clause 2, standing part of the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3 to the bill reads as follows: the appropriations for each financial year shall expire on the 31st of December 2021. Where there are any unused appropriations at December 31, 2020, these unused amounts shall not expire and shall be carried forward to the 2021 financial year. Entities may use appropriations approved for the 2021 financial year to incur executive expenses, acquire executive assets, make equity investments or loans, and undertake borrowing in the 2020 financial year. All those in favor of Clause 3 standing part of the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Clause 3 stands part of the bill. The proposed long title of the bill is A Bill for a Law to Appropriate Executive Financial Transactions for the Financial Years 2020 and 2021. All those in favor of the long title that I have just read standing part of the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. The title now stands part of the bill. Pursuant to Standing Order 64-7, I shall put the question that I do report the bill to the House. All those in favor of the bill being reported to the House, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. The bill will be reported to the House. Honourable members, the committee will meet again tomorrow, Thursday, the 5th of December at 2 p.m. to review the report of the committee and the minutes of the committee's deliberations. Once these are approved by the committee, the reporting aspect of the appropriation bill will be made to the House, and once that is done, the third reading of the bill will be considered by the House and hopefully approved.
Mr. Chairman, can you please say whether that's going to be in camera or not? Because I don't want people questioning why we gone in camera.
Members, I want to extend my thanks to the staff of the Legislative Assembly for their persistence and keeping up with us throughout the last 3 weeks. I also want to give thanks everyone too for sticking with us through this and getting us to this point where we've now concluded all of the deliberations, and we are on the cusp now of approving the budget for the 2 financial years. It's been a long haul for us, but we have made it through, and I'm grateful for that. I also want to thank the Financial Secretary and his team for being here. FS has been here literally every day with us as well, sitting next to me. And everyone else who has participated throughout the 3 weeks in providing support to the chair and to the government. I thank you all again, and this will conclude Finance Committee, and we meet again tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. Thank you all.
that